Okay, welcome. It's lovely to have you all here. It's always touching to me that people are willing to come out in the middle of the week and join us for meditation. My name's Dan Zigmond. I'm leading our meditation tonight. I'm a teacher in the Soto Zen Buddhist lineage, ordained at a small temple south of here, Jikoji, which was founded by Kobunshin Odagawa Roshi, one of the first generation of Japanese Zen teachers to come here to America. And I've been teaching here now for a few months, and really great joy to teach in this just beautiful space right in the heart of San Francisco. What we usually do is I speak just a little bit as we get started. Then we go right into meditation. I'll give some instruction. We usually do 2 periods of meditation. In the first, I give guidance during the period, and then the second is mostly silent. And then when that's done, we have just an open session of question and answer. That's my favorite part of the evening because I like speaking about things that are present for you. It's easy for me to talk about things that are on my mind, but I'd much actually rather talk about things that are on your minds. And so I hope, welcome. I hope you've all brought questions with you that you might have, either that arise during our meditation or during our instruction, or just that you've been carrying with you, maybe questions that brought you here tonight. The Zen Buddhist tradition is a distinct lineage of Buddhist meditation. Buddhism itself arose in India about 2,500 years ago. Zen arose about 1,200 years ago, I think, roughly in China, and from China spread throughout East Asia to Korea, Vietnam, Taiwan, and to Japan. And my own teacher, as I mentioned, came from Japan and brought the practice here to the States. The word Zen itself is a Japanese pronunciation of the Chinese word, which refers in itself to meditation. And so Zen Buddhism, welcome. Zen Buddhism literally means meditation Buddhism. And Buddhism, by the time it had reached China, had gotten a little complicated, had developed lots of different doctrines and scriptures. And there was a movement within China to try to come back to the basics, to come back to just meditation. And so the Zen tradition tried to strip away a lot of the complexity that you see in other forms of Buddhism, and just focus on a very simple practice, the practice that we'll do here tonight. In Japanese, they call this practice shikantaza, which translates literally to just sitting or nothing but sitting. The idea is that we don't try to do anything particularly fancy or tricky. We just sit, we pay attention, and we see what arises. People sometimes come to Zen practice with certain ideas about what it should be like, that we should maybe clear our minds, that we should enter into a certain state, maybe of bliss or relaxation. And all those things can happen, but none of them are supposed to happen. All that is supposed to happen is that we pay attention to whatever does happen. So it's a rare opportunity to spend a little bit of time not really trying to accomplish anything, just trying to experience the world exactly as it is, to experience ourselves exactly as we are. So there's really no such thing as like a good or a bad period of meditation. As long as you're still here, you're still sitting, you're still aware of what's happening. When I ring the bell to end our meditation, then you've done everything you're supposed to do. There really is no goal beyond being fully present for whatever arises. It's not that there's anything wrong with other forms of meditation, and I've practiced other forms where you maybe say a mantra, or you try to control your breathing, or you try to do something else, or there's meditative yoga where you do complicated things with your body. Those are all very powerful practices themselves, but I've always really been taken by just the simplicity of Zen practice, where we don't really try to do anything. We just try to notice what's already happening. The format is pretty simple. We use these bells in a traditional Zen temple. Everything that happened is controlled by bells and drums and other instruments. People don't wear watches and they don't carry phones. So the way you know when to wake up, the way you know when to eat, the way you know when to come to the meditation hall, the way you know when to start meditating, all of that is just certain combination of bells and drums and other things. So we do a sort of simplified version of that, just using this bell, beautiful bell, to signal the beginning and end of meditation. I'll signal the beginning of meditation with 3 long bells. It'll sound like this. So that sound tells us that we're beginning our meditation. As I said, we'll be doing 2 periods of meditation. So at the end of the first one, I'll ring the bell twice. And that'll be your signal that that first period of meditation is over. You can open your eyes, you can stretch or change your posture, have a drink of water, add a layer, take off a layer, whatever you need to do. I'll ring the bell then 3 times again for the next period. As I said, the second period of meditation will be almost entirely silent, so I won't be giving guidance. And then when we're all done with meditating for the evening, I'll just ring the bell once in closing. So what do you do in between the bells? Again, Zen meditation is pretty straightforward. We try to sit, and you can sit on your chair, or you can take one of these cushions. You can put the cushion on the floor, as some people have. You can put the cushion on the chair, which is probably what I'll do. We try to sit upright as much as possible, with our back straight and our shoulders back. It's traditional to sit in half lotus or full lotus, but if you're sitting on the chair, you can also just try to have your feet pretty firmly planted beneath you, again with your back straight, your shoulders back. We place our hands in our laps, one palm over the other, our thumbs lightly touching, making this circle. This circle has become something of a symbol of Zen. You sometimes see it drawn in calligraphy at Zen temples. Symbol of our practice, a symbol of emptiness. We start by just listening to the bell as it sounds. When the sound of the bell has finished, we bring our attention to our breathing. And during the first period, I'll give more detailed instructions about what that means. But we're really just using our breath as a kind of natural metronome, a natural touchstone to stay in this present moment. Whatever else arises, if we have thoughts, if we have feelings or emotions, memories, it's all okay. As I said, there's nothing that we're trying to accomplish other than staying present. We pay attention to those thoughts, those feelings, emotions, memories. But we keep coming back to our breathing to ground us here, now, together. The 2 periods will be about 15 minutes each. And again, as I said, when we're done, we'll just have a conversation. I'll take questions either about the meditation we've done together or anything else, whatever's brought you here today. And we'll go from there. Before we get started with our meditation, were there any questions, anything you didn't understand, either here in the room or online? One thing I forgot to mention, in a traditional Zen temple, the lights would be a little lower, and also we would all be facing the wall. And so we would meditate with our eyes open. Here, where it's a little brighter and we're facing each other, yeah, a little bit dimmer would be great. But still, you might find it easier to keep your eyes closed because there's a lot of visual distraction here. And especially those of you who are joining us by Zoom, facing a bright screen, you're probably better off sitting with your eyes closed rather than trying to have them. In the traditional Zen way, they would be sort of half open and half closed, our gaze just cast down in front of us. Any other questions before we begin? If not, let's all find our upright posture, either on a cushion or on the chair. If you need more cushions, there's cushions over there. Oh. So the question was, what is half lotus? So half lotus is when you have one foot on your thigh and then the other foot sort of just tucked underneath. Where you're sitting, so that's half lotus, right? What you're doing now. What we were doing before is sometimes called Burmese posture, because I guess that's what they do in Burma, where neither foot is on top of our legs and they're both just flat in front of us. In Japan, half lotus with one foot up is very common. And then full lotus, which I can just sort of barely do, is where both our feet are on top of our shins, like that. If you can sit comfortably in half lotus, you probably do a lot of yoga, which I don't do, so it's hard for me. So I sit half lotus, which means just one of my feet is up. But it's also perfectly fine to just sit on the chair. That's very common. When the last time I was at the monastery at Tassajara, I spent a few weeks there a couple years ago. The abbot spent the whole time sitting on the chair. That's just where she's most comfortable these days. Yeah? Yes, you can lie down or stand. The only problem with lying down is it's easy to fall asleep. Okay. Well, let's get our back straight, our shoulders back, our arms resting comfortably at our sides, our hands in our lap, palms together and thumbs gently touching. Once again, I'll ring the bell 3 times for us to start. When you hear the bell, just listen to the sound of the bell. Listen to it until you can't hear it any longer. And then bring your attention to your breathing. And I'll pick things up from there. We'll begin. Now bring your full attention to your breathing. You don't have to match your breathing to my breathing. Or to any fixed idea of how your breathing should be. Just allow yourself to notice each breath exactly as it is. giving your full attention to each in-breath and each out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. If thoughts arise, let them arise and let them go. Notice each thought without grasping it. Notice it and release it. Don't beat yourself up for getting distracted. Just allow each thought to be a reminder to bring your attention back to the next in-breath and the next out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. It often helps in keeping ourselves focused if we narrate each breath. And so with each in-breath, we can say to ourselves, I am breathing in. And with each out-breath, say to ourselves, I am breathing out. I am breathing in. I am breathing out. I am breathing in. I am breathing out. Breathing in. Breathing out. try to notice the unique qualities of each and every breath. Notice whether each breath is long or short. Notice whether each breath is fast or slow. Notice these qualities without evaluating them, without judging them, without judging yourself. Don't think to yourself, long is better than short. Don't think to yourself, fast is worse than slow. Just notice each breath exactly as it is. Giving your full attention to each in-breath and each out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. Whatever arises, thoughts, feelings, memories, emotions. Let it arise. Let it arise and let it go. Just keep coming back to the next in-breath and the next out-breath. in-breath, out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. In a moment, I'll ring the bell 2 times to end this first period of meditation. Once again, when you hear the bell, just listen to the sound of the bell. Listen to it until you can't hear any longer. Then take one more in-breath, one more out-breath, and open your eyes. One more in-breath, one more out-breath, and open your eyes. So now we have about 2 or 3 minutes if you need to take some water, adjust your posture, even use the bathroom. And then we'll sit again. Stretch your back a little bit if you need to. Okay, let's again find our upright posture, with our back straight, shoulders back. Arms hanging loosely at our side, our hands in our lap, one palm over the other, and our thumbs lightly touching. This time our meditation will be mostly silent, but you can follow the same instructions I gave before. When you hear the bell, just listen to the sound of the bell. Listen to it until you can't hear it any longer. Then bring your attention to your breathing. And try to keep your attention there. We'll begin. remember, whatever brought you here tonight, whatever else you have going on this week, this month, this year, nothing is more important right now, in this moment, than bringing your full attention to this moment of sitting and breathing. Because if you can bring your full attention to this moment, you can bring your full attention to the next moment, and the moment after that, and the moment after that, and to every moment after that. And bringing your full attention to every moment is what it means to be fully awake and fully alive. When you hear me ring the bell one time to end our meditation tonight, once again listen to the bell. Listen to it until you can't hear it any longer. Then take one more in-breath, one more out-breath, and open your eyes. One more in-breath, one more out-breath, and open your eyes. Well, thank you all very much. That was some really lovely sitting. It was a particularly musical sitting. We had more than the usual music going by outside. Something else to pay attention to. As I said, I like to use the time after our meditation just to open it up for questions and to talk about whatever is on your mind. So I hope some of you here in the room and some of you on Zoom have brought questions with you. Those of you on Zoom, if you would like, we invite you to turn on your camera so we can see the faces of the people we've been sitting with. But if you can't, that's okay too. But yeah, with that, does anyone have anything they'd like to ask or even just say? Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this sitting. There is something that I've been turning over like a lot in the past few days, and I am interested in your thoughts. I've been feeling a little bit torn, personally, between tremendous admiration for the courage and resistance of people in Minneapolis these past weeks, and frustration or concern about the dilution of Kingian nonviolence over the past few decades, reinterpretations of it that seem to be increasingly less effective, leading to less consistent outcomes than they did 30 and 40 years ago. And this little tiny bit of like philosophical anxiety about, postulating that an entire population holding a total commitment to practices of non-destructive resistance to state violence, manifesting as a form of very, very deep protection of the state in its violence, in perhaps increasing violence. And I've been turning over these questions about like commitment to like bulking up strategies and practices in myself in the direction of like determined Kingian nonviolence or other similar practices, and like an angst or like worry about misunderstanding the situation in a way that could lead to terrible, terrible harm, particularly of the most vulnerable people in our communities. Yeah, and as you know, as a committed Zen Buddhist, I do take my vows, all 13 of them, very seriously. I care about interpreting my life in terms of those precepts. And in moments like this, I do feel myself coming up against the tension of acting for justice and walking for peace. Yeah.
Thank you. So, you know, Buddha himself was, I suppose, a pacifist, and tried to practice nonviolence in his own life, and his rules for his monastic followers were quite strict in advocating for not harming others and not causing harm, suffering to others. But he was also, in his own way, quite open-minded. He did not require all his followers to take those vows. He had a large community of followers who did not become monastics. Some of those, were kings. Some of them were soldiers. There have been Buddhist countries that, where Buddhism is the official state religion. It was, of course, the case in Tibet when it was independent, but it's the case now in Thailand, for example, which is an officially, like, constitutionally Buddhist country. And as far as I know, all the examples of Buddhist countries, they've had armies. So they've not practiced the sort of strict nonviolence that the Reverend Dr. King advocated, or Mahatma Gandhi in India advocated. And so, at least the way our practice is normally understood, it doesn't require nonviolence, even if it seems to lean towards nonviolence, and even if many of us interpret it as encouraging nonviolence. But I think Buddha's reluctance to kind of require it of his students, his non-monastic students, was a sort of acknowledgement that practicing meditation, striving for awakening in the world, in the way that all of us are, so living in the world, entangled in the world, is extremely difficult. we often think of the monastic path, because it's so strict, as being very difficult. Wake up early in the morning, you meditate for many hours a day, live very simply, eat very simply. In the strictest forms, you sleep on the ground, not on a bed. It seems like it involves a lot of hardship. But Buddha's view of monastic practice was very different. Buddha viewed monastic practice as the easy way to practice. And the kind of practice all of us are doing, where we're entangled in the world. Perhaps we have partners, families, friends, jobs, schools, commitments to each other. That's what he found to be really difficult. And so I think in part because he chose not to practice that way, he chose not to take on all that difficulty. I think he seemed reluctant to place too many requirements on those of us who did, acknowledging that it's very difficult and sort of inevitably involves compromise. So in the same way, although I share your affection for the teachings of Reverend Dr. King, I'm reluctant to judge those who engage in other practices. These are very hard questions. And the path of complete nonviolence is just a very difficult path. And perhaps it's not for everyone. When you talked about Reverend Dr. King, I think you said something like, 30 or 40 years ago, but in fact, he lived almost 60 years ago. It's a long time ago. And Gandhi, of course, lived even longer ago. There haven't been too many people who tried their approach, since then. Which is, I think for me and perhaps for you, sad and disappointing, but is maybe an indication that it's a very, very hard approach. And so, although we might be disappointed that not everyone today in this country is adopting those means, that strict nonviolent approach to resistance. The truth is almost nobody tries that approach. And so I don't know that we can be too disappointed that people, say, in Minneapolis or elsewhere are not. I don't know. I think it is a bit of a puzzle. The Buddhist countries with armies, people committed to Buddhist teachings who nonetheless feel that violence in some situations is justified. I think our personal commitment in this practice is to try to reduce suffering. We'll all try to do that in different ways. And I suppose for me, part of that commitment is to try to have compassion for people who are trying to reduce suffering in ways very different from myself. Thank you. So we didn't start with a very easy question. But you can ask hard questions or you can ask easy questions, whatever question you'd like, and you can ask questions online. The guy who always asks a question online doesn't seem to be here tonight, so somebody else online has to ask a question, because Martin seems to have taken the night off. Yes, please. Can you pass the microphone behind you?
Hello.
Hi.
Great sit. First time here.
Welcome.
Well, with you, rather. General question. I was curious about the garment around your neck.
Yeah.
And what is it for and what does it symbolize?
Sure. Thank you. So the question about these garments, it has a long history. So in the original Buddhist monastic practices, I think we have to understand Buddhist teachings a little bit in context of the time that he and place where he was teaching. So there are certainly some things that are timeless, but there are some things that, are very clear that he was reacting to things around him. So I think one thing that was very important to Buddha was he didn't want the Buddhist monastic community to become just another caste within India, to become just another sort of special category of person, because he really did believe in the radical equality of all people. And so he accepted everybody into the Buddhist Sangha, regardless of gender, caste, anything, race. And a lot of the rules around the monastics are around being very humble, because he didn't want them to be held up high. And even today, when you do ordain, when I ordained as a priest, there's a line in the ceremony which is something like, you are now the equal of every person. And it's interesting because I think we're intended to understand it two ways. No one is better than us, but also no one is worse than us. We are just literally the equal of every person. And so, in terms of dress, he really didn't want monks and nuns to be dressed in fancy clothes. And so the tradition was that you would collect rags, often from funeral pyres, so leftover rags that hadn't burned when they burned bodies and things like that. And you would stitch them together to make a robe, and then you would dye it all one color. And I guess the brightest dye they had was this saffron dye, which would, basically turn any color cloth into a uniform color. And so traditionally Buddhist monks wore these cloths, these robes stitched together of lots of little pieces and then dyed all one color. These days we don't do that anymore. We don't collect rags, and we don't dye the cloth. But it's still traditional to make robes out of lots of little pieces. And so you'll see this is actually sewn out of lots of little pieces together. And this is really just, this kind of robe comes from Japan. Buddhism changed in each country each culture that it's encountered. It's changed here in the States in ways that are interesting. But in Japan, first of all, they started wearing darker colored robes. I don't really know why that was. And then they sort of invented these miniature robes that are basically a model of a full-size robe. So if you imagine this robe being much larger, then that's what you would wear around yourself and wrap as a sign of a priest. And I have a robe like that that I wear in more formal occasions. But in informal occasions, you wear this tiny little miniature robe, which is exactly the same pattern. It's lots of little pieces all sewn together. And you sew this by hand as part of your training to become a priest. And then you just wear it around your neck as just a symbol, that sort of, I'm not wearing robes, but I could be wearing robes, or it's like symbolic of my robes. Traditionally in Japan, you sew a black one when you're first ordained, and then you sew a brown one when you become a teacher. And then they're inscribed on the back. Your teacher inscribes something. That's my name in Japanese. I think that's the symbol of Jikoji, the temple. That's the symbol of my teacher who helped me complete my training. He wrote a little poem here. But you inscribe something on the back, and it sort of represents your permission to teach. So I try, if I'm not wearing my big long robes, then I wear this when I'm teaching because it's my official permission to teach as a Zen Buddhist. It's a rakusu. So this is called a rakusu. The full robe that you would wear over your shoulder, which looks a little more traditional, is called an okesa. Thank you. I'm really hoping for a question online.
I have a comment
Okay, please.
and maybe a question too. I was reminded during the meditation of your cues to breathe in and out, and it reminded me further that I was really appreciative of those. It stuck with me last month through my sits and through, out the day sometimes. And at the end, when you say, if you can do it, this breath, that also really stuck. And so thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I guess there's one question. I think I was telling you I was at that workshop this weekend, and the teacher at the end wished it was an emotional kind of workshop, and emotional science and Tibetan meditation. And his wish was that our emotional triggers, may they dissolve like snowflakes in the ocean. I guess I was curious if you had anything to say on how Zen might help that trigger dissolution so quickly, if that makes sense. Or I don't know.
Yeah. Part of our practice in Zen is we just notice whatever arises. And so we're not trying to cause anything to arise. We're not trying to cause anything not to arise. We just notice whatever arises. But after we notice it, we let it go. So we don't push it away, but we don't hold on to it. We don't actually analyze it. We don't really inquire into it, explore it. We just let it go. The analogy I often use is, if you like laying on the grass on a sunny day and you just watch the clouds and you just watch them. You don't make any effort to keep them there or to push them away. You just watch them. And maybe sometimes when we do that, we start to daydream and we imagine shapes in the clouds and things like that, but we don't really do that either. We just notice them for exactly what they are. And if they move away, we notice them moving away, and we notice whatever comes next. The next cloud or a clear sky, whatever it happens to be. And, although I like to emphasize that there's no particular goal or purpose in Zen practice, it's just the practice is the practice. I do think that turns out to be a useful skill, noticing and letting go. And as we develop that skill, that habit of noticing things and letting go, and then noticing the next thing, and then noticing the next thing, and then noticing the next thing, I do think some of these thoughts, memories, feelings that arise, they lose a little bit of their power. They don't capture our attention in the same way. Some things, they literally seem to capture our attention and we can't bring it back to anything else. And this habit we develop of noticing, letting go, noticing, letting go, I think it starts to be a bit of an antidote to that. So, I don't know if Zen practice really can help us dissolve all of our emotional triggers. Some of them are quite powerful. Some of them just take time to melt away. But I do think that habit of noticing without grasping is very helpful. We had a question in back. Can you pass the microphone?
Hi. My question is kind of the inverse of that. When you're meditating and things are coming up and they're good ideas and you want to keep them, I just have this urge to like capture it or note things down, but I have to let them go because I've committed to the act of meditation. What's your advice for that, or like how to, and it's sometimes obviously, I'm not so lucky and there are things that I don't want to be thinking about, but sometimes the ideas are really good or the thoughts are really good.
I've had that question before. In addition to being a meditation teacher, I also work a bit as a coach, sometimes with executives. And there was this one executive who had exactly that question that, thoughts come, thoughts go, but what do you do if it's a really good thought? Our practice is a bit of an act of faith that we let them go. And we have faith that if they're important, they'll come back. I studied writing at one point in my life years ago, and I had this writing teacher. And I really think almost every writer you meet carries a notebook. And so when an idea comes up, they write it down in the notebook. And I have almost never met a writer who doesn't walk around with a notebook. But this one writing teacher is quite a successful writer. She doesn't keep a notebook. And she just has this faith that, if it's important, it will come back. And so, if you have some idea that, the thing I told this CEO is, if you're sitting there in meditation and you come up with the cure for cancer and you'd like to jot it down, like, I'm not going to tell you not to. You can do that if you want. But our practice is a bit of an act of faith that we don't need to hold on to these things, that the things we need will come back. And that also allows us to let go of this evaluation, this judgment. So, you talked about not always being lucky, not all of the thoughts being good. But I disagree. I think all the thoughts are good. And all the thoughts are bad. Like they're just thoughts. And so, even that thought you have of like, this is a good thought and I should hold on to it, let go of that too. And just let whatever arise. And it's a short time. It's 15 minutes. Even people who meditate for, long times typically don't meditate more than an hour. So you've got lots of time to have these thoughts and play with them and capture them and work with them. But during the 5, 10, 15 minutes that we meditate, we let them go. Yeah, please.
Thank you. So you say notice wherever arises.
Yes.
That arises, where does it come from? That is like one question. And the other one is, what part of us is the one that notices wherever arises or lets that go?
Yeah. So in Zen, we tend not to inquire too deeply into those things, and that perhaps they're not really answerable questions. I don't know where the thoughts come from. I mean, the simple answer is they come from our minds, but what is the mind, and where do they come from in the mind? Why are they there? I don't know. What I do know is that they arise and they depart, and that there is a limit, that at some point they stop arising, and then at some point they come back. And so we just try to watch this ebb and flow, this change, without really inquiring too deeply about why is this happening, where are they coming from. And there probably are answers. I like this example of the clouds. I mean, clouds, of course, come from somewhere, and I don't actually know where, but somebody knows where. It's a well-studied thing, and perhaps someday we'll know where the thoughts come from. But we don't really need to know. You don't need to know where the clouds come from to notice them and also to see them go. So, yeah, it's sort of not our area of expertise. Our area of expertise is just in the paying of attention. I hope that's helpful. Yeah, please.
Not really a question, more just a noodle, which is when we were meditating. I don't know if people online could hear it, but when we were meditating, a woman walked by and she was like, "It's not how it's supposed to be. Like, this is not how it's supposed to be," or something to that effect. And I listened to that and I was like, oh, I just had such a similar thought. And then I was like, oh, well, shoot. I'm not really supposed to, and I kind of had a judgment about it. Kind of had a judgment about her, and then I had a judgment about myself. And I was like, well, I'm not really supposed to be judging, that thought in her or myself. And then I'm like, well, I'm not really supposed to be judging even that thought. And I sort of went on this whole like rigmarole internally. And I'm not really sure where that left me, but that's what happened in my brain.
Yeah, I think it's very common. So, we have a thought, and then we have a judgment about that thought, and we have a judgment about the judgment, and I think the practice is just whenever in that spiral you notice that that's what you're doing, you just try to let it go and just come back to the breath. I give this instruction not to beat ourselves up, and that's a hard instruction. That might be the hardest instruction. But we try not to beat ourselves up. And if we notice ourselves beating ourselves up, we try not to beat ourselves up about that. And if we notice ourselves beating ourselves up about that, we try not to beat ourselves up about that. At some point, we try to let it go, let it all go, and just come back to the breath. And all I can really say is that in my experience, basically everything gets easier with practice, including not beating ourselves up. And so we just stick with it. Again, it's a bit of an act of faith that by doing this practice that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, we eventually find this ability to let things go. Yeah. Oh, an online question. Amazing.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you for the sit. I have attended a couple of your workshops at Esalen, actually. So, but I've never joined this group here. So my question is about lay practitioners and the role of lay practitioners in Zen. And presumably most of us are living our modern lives, as you call them, while just practicing this as lay practitioners. But a lot of the stories and things you hear are more about the monastics. And I'm just wondering, like, through time, has there been a role for lay practitioners always? Is that more modern nowadays? Is that kind of a US thing? Are there sanghas in Japan with a lot of lay practitioners? I just wondered the historical context there.
Thank you. And thanks for joining tonight. So there have always been lay practitioners. Buddha's very first students, Tapusa and Balika, I think were their names, were lay practitioners. So the very first people who found him, actually before he had decided to teach, he had had his awakening experience. He was sitting under a tree somewhere, And somehow word got around that there was this fully enlightened teacher sitting under a tree outside of town. And these two guys who were just essentially traveling salesmen went out there and like asked to be his students. And he took them as students. And it said these days, when you officially become a Buddhist, you do what's called taking refuge, and you take refuge in these three treasures: the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. So the Buddha, the teacher; the Dharma, the teachings; and the Sangha, the community. But there wasn't a Sangha yet, so these first two students only took two refuges in the Buddha and the Dharma, because he hadn't decided to start a Sangha yet. That came a little bit later. So from the very, very beginning, there were lay practitioners before there were monastic practitioners. That said, Buddha really thought that lay practice was very hard. And so I think he was pretty encouraging of people to ordain and become monastics. He just thought, if you're really serious about practice, that's just the easiest way to do it. It's really, really hard to do as a lay person. He still had lay students all through his life. And I think his very last sort of sermon, when he's on his deathbed, one of the things he does is he recounts, I don't know, they're not exactly like his favorite students, but the students that he still remembered. And some of them were lay people. A lot of them were monks and nuns, but some of them were lay people. So that was 2,500 years ago. In the time since, I think these different sort of subgroups of the Sangha have waxed and waned. There are, I think for a long time, let's say over the last few hundred years, meditation was mostly practiced by monastics. So not a lot of lay people were practicing meditation. And lay people saw their role primarily as like supporting the temples. So if you go to like the really traditional Buddhist countries, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Burma, a lot of what lay people are doing there is they're donating to the monks and nuns. The monks and nuns are not allowed to handle money, so they donate food, or they build the temples for them, build the monasteries, and they see that as their role. And then the monks and nuns are the ones who are actually doing the meditating. But then over the last, I don't know, I guess roughly 100 years, there's been kind of a renewed interest in lots of places in lay people also meditating. So a kind of resurgence in that part of the Sangha, which had been dormant for a little while. So in Burma, there was a very famous meditation teacher who started having a bunch of lay students, and a lot of the Vipassana teachers that we see now trace their lineage to him. So that's who Goenka studied with, who's the one who started all these 10-day retreats that you have all over the world now. But also a lot of the American Vipassana teachers studied with him in Burma. And then in Japan, in the Zen temples, really after World War II, I guess, or so, there started to just be renewed interest among foreigners, Americans and Europeans in particular, but also Japanese people, in visiting temples and learning meditation and starting to meditate. So it's not an entirely American phenomenon, but it is true that in the States, the balance is almost entirely reversed. So instead of having like big monastic communities and a few lay people who go and study, we have very, very small monastic communities and lots of lay people who study meditation. So it's just a little bit flipped. But I think over time, particularly as things like meditation apps and all that become more popular, my guess is that we'll see that in Asia as well, and maybe even it's starting to happen now. Until, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 years ago, the only way to learn meditation was to go to a temple and find a teacher and study. And we now live in this kind of crazy time. Noam and I were talking about this before we started this session today, where the vast majority of people who meditate have never met a teacher. They either read a book, or they listened to a podcast, or they did something over Zoom, or they used an app. But, probably like 1% of people who meditate have ever met a teacher. That's like a completely like ahistorical, like very modern thing. For 2,400 years or so, that wasn't true. And then in the last 100 years, really starting with cheap paperback books, that started to shift. But I think what that means is, a lot of those people who went and found teachers, they'd gone through all that trouble, they were already very committed. A lot of them decided to ordain. And so the fact that now most people are learning meditation without, having that face-to-face encounter with the teacher, very, very few of those people are going to choose to ordain. And so I think probably from now on, lay people are going to be the vast majority of the Sangha. And so we're all going to try to do this practice that Buddha felt was really difficult, of practicing meditation while trying to live in the world. And that's just where the Dharma, the Sangha, where we are now. But it's a great question. Thank you for asking, and thanks for joining. I think that we're basically at time now. I really, really appreciate all of you who came out, those of you who joined online. I teach here every month, the first Tuesday of the month.